Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, whatever the case may be when you have an opportunity to see this. My name is Clovis Honore. I am here with Mr. Matthew Mendenhall. We're doing this video as an opportunity to share with you some of the ideas that I've developed in the time that I've been in San Diego, which has been 40 years. In that time, I've been trained as a community organizer and worked with a number of nonprofit organizations here in San Diego. I've been the president of some, on the board of directors of some, executive director of some. But almost always for the last 20 years, I've had an opportunity to work in southeastern San Diego and work with my people. And that has been my blessing for this whole time. Although it has cost me considerably, both financially and other ways, the rewards are much worth it. Kind of like the workout I did this morning, I went and ran, and at almost 60 years old now, that kind of hurts. But the rewards are worth it. And wait till I got a cruise coming up in November. Y'all don't need to know that. He might cut that out. But there's a plan. My name is Clovis Honore, Honore. If you go look at my Facebook page, you'll see a picture of me 40 years ago when I was 20 years old. Cut, sharp. By the time I get on that boat in November, I want to look like that. And you can see, I don't quite right now, but we'll get there. Anyways, that's just a little introduction, kind of loosen things up. What we're going to talk about today is what I call the Nehemiah Project. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about Nehemiah, but very briefly, those of you who know the Old Testament of the Bible, Nehemiah was the vizier, as it were, or the cupbearer for the king of Persia. There's long stuff that goes with that, but if you're a Bible scholar, you got it. If not, you might have to read it. Long story short, he was Jewish. He and his family had been taken out of Jerusalem many, many years ago, and now he had risen to a place of prominence in the court of the king of Persia. While he was there, he was kicking it, doing his thing, having a good time. Everything was all right. But he was always worried about what was going on back in the hood, back in Jerusalem. And one day, some family members, cousins, whatever, came in, visited him in Persia. And he was like, here's an opportunity. I got some friends I can ask what's going on in Jerusalem. You know, they didn't have Facebook and Instagram and cell phones back then, right? So, you know, they're many, many miles away from home. You don't know what's going on. And he said, so what's happening in the neighborhood? And they said, things are very bad in the neighborhood. Long story short, the way they described it, he said, the walls are broken down and the gates have been burned. What that really meant was that there is no defense for the people who are there, and they're suffering because of that. Nehemiah, there's a much more longer story that goes with that, but the long story short was Nehemiah determined he was going to go back and help build the wall and repair the gates. The two critical purposes: one, to keep bad folk out. Because one of the problems that was going on was folks named Sanballat and Tobias were coming into Jerusalem and creating havoc. Like if they were bringing in drugs. It's interesting that they didn't have any drug factories no poppy fields in southeastern San Diego, but lots of drugs. We ain't got no gun factories, but lots of guns. So that's what was going on. But then in the inside, the people of Jerusalem had a long history and tradition of how they took care of each other and themselves. And because of the outside influence, all of that was disrupted. One of the things was that every so many years, if you had enslaved or loaned money to a relative or a friend in the community, after so many years, you just had to forgive that. But they were keeping their families members, children, and friends as slaves long beyond those times. And so the inside of the community had become disorganized because of what was going on from the outside to the inside. So the idea of the Nehemiah Project is, how do we build a wall around a community so that community, one, is safe from predators on the outside, and two, can go back to developing its own cultural ethos with which it develops itself and does the things it needs to do. So I got a thing I call circles and squares. It starts with squares. And it's just a matter of us looking at who we are, where we come from, what we're all about, and then using that information to try to move forward. The principles are primarily called Sankofa. So it starts with the black family, what we call the black family. And whatever your philosophical or political disposition, in this iteration of humanity and existence, it still takes a mother and a father to make sisters and brothers. So the basic family is still male, female, and children that come out of that. Because without the male and the female, there can be no children. So the basic family, and however you want to restructure that in terms of extended families and other iterations, is not the issue. The issue is, this is where we start. The challenge we see in the black family is that we see too many of the fathers have been taken out of the family by prison, by lack of education, and by, what's the third one? Unemployment. So when we see in the typical family in America, we see the structure of the family, we see the success of the family in America because of the way America is structured. If you have a mother and father and sister and brother in the family, They tend to thrive. The other aspect we see of what's happening in the black family is this thing called single parent family, where there is only one parent engaged in that family. And there are some statistics that show, and it's easy to find out, just Google it, that the number one constant for poverty in America is being a single parent. If you want to look at the numbers and say, well, what is the likelihood of you becoming somebody who's going to be in poverty? They said, well, be a single parent. Because of a number of factors. We're not going to go into all of that today. That's another set of research. All this comes with a set of research, and you can go back and do the research, but I'm just going to give you the components that we can look at that help us identify that. Then we also know that there's a disproportionate number of African American children in foster care. And no, I don't write that well, but I'm saying it so you can get it. So these are the components that disrupt the family structure. And with that disruption comes lack of power, more than anything else. But you're gonna lose capacity for income. You can lose capacity for educational attainment. You can lose capacity for employment, which comes with educational attainment, which comes with stability. And you lose stability when you lose the structure. And so single-parent families, brothers and sisters going in and out of prison, and children in foster care are extraordinarily disruptive components of our community. So this equation has to be fixed. Now, there's a number of principles and propositions and possibilities for fixing that. But the bottom line is, unless and until we can't go on with the idea that we can have these disruptive structures as part of our community as a norm and think that we're going to get where we're trying to go. Because we'll never develop the other components that we need. The last estimate I looked at is that 60% of African American families at this point are single parent families. That doesn't mean there aren't two adults that go in and out of the house, but fundamentally speaking, in terms of the capacity of the family to develop and strive holistically, we're looking at 66%. As long as that number looks like that and doesn't start to come down significantly, as long as we think it's okay for single parent, as long as we celebrate this equation, it's going to be very difficult for us to continue to move forward. Now, keeping this in mind, now you got this, maybe you took a screenshot of that, you can slow it down, back it up, whatever you got to do. We're going to take this and shorten it to just the black family. We're going to have this little square in the middle. So what do we know about families? What do we know about the impact of community on families? So no man is an island. No family exists in isolation. Everything exists in community. One of the things we also don't have time for is the reality that there is not 7 billion humans on the planet. There's one human being on the planet. It has 7 billion cells. And we can demonstrate that simply by saying, we can demonstrate that in many ways, but simply think of this. 7 billion humans on the planet. Every last one of them has a mommy and a daddy. So they didn't drop out of the planet. They didn't drop from the sky. They didn't grow out of the ground. They didn't disappear out of nowhere. Every last one of them has a mommy and daddy. And every one of their mommies and daddies has a mommy and daddy. Right? And my children, the 4 that came out of me biologically, are made of my cells. I didn't go in a laboratory somewhere. I didn't go out to the field and dig up a rock and something and put something together and then throw it on the ground and it literally came out of my body and their mother's body. And so did I, and so did you, and so did our parents. All the way back to some 2 people that started this whole thing. And so from 2 people's cells, which according to certain philosophical perspectives, one being split into 2 persons. If you look at the way that Genesis describes it, we actually have one being split into 2 persons. So one set of cells created all the cells, and it's just the same cells living on and on and on. 7 years from now, the same cells that are in your body now will not be there. You'll have a whole set of new cells, but you'll still be the same person. And so just because there's 7 billion cells now, as opposed to the two cells that started, or the 1 cell that started, doesn't mean that it's a different person. It's one person, 7 billion cells. Doesn't exist in isolation. For this being to stay on this planet physically, it needs 6 things. But we're only going to talk about, but it needs 5. It needs 5. We're going to talk about 4, because one of them you still get for free. We'll talk about that in a minute. You need water. You need food. You need clothing. You need shelter. And this is 2018 with the United States of America. You can't just walk out and pick these things up. You can't just walk out and grab these things. All of them cost money and other things. In order to get there, you're going to need transportation, communication, information. And if you don't want to lose your mind while you're doing all this, you're going to need some recreation. That's a whole nother conversation. So water, food, clothing, shelter, transportation, communication, information, and recreation. Now here's the challenge. Let me do it this way. When you go to get water, who do you pay? You pay Joe, you pay Mary, you pay Theo. No, you pay the water company. When you go to get food, who do you pay? You pay Mary, you pay Peter, you pay Paul. No, you pay the grocery store. When you go to get clothing, you may know the person behind the counter, but the money goes to the corporation. Your mortgage goes to somebody, some institution. The car you bought from an institution. The gas you buy from an institution. If you bought it on time, that you bought it from an institution. Communication. Do you own? You don't even own. We don't even own a cell phone anymore. You're leasing the cell phone, right? Mm-hmm. Communication, information. You're paying Cox. You're paying somebody else. You're paying an institution, an agency, an organization. And we'll get to this one in a minute, but that's a bit of a different thing. The bottom line here is that you don't have any control over these institutions. When me and Matthew, when me and Takufa, when we want to do a deal, we sit down face to face, we make a determination how we're going to do these things. When you do any of these things, you get a contract that's 41 pages long that you don't read, you sign and agree with it because some band of lawyers somewhere in a place you don't know for some very, very rich people who own a corporation put all this stuff together and came to you and said, you're going to do this or you're not going to get what you want. You go see if you can get a cell phone or an internet service provider or a mortgage or a car without signing one of those contracts written by somebody you've never seen or heard before that you can't read and didn't read. So you're at a great disadvantage in this context, except I have a company, I'll say it out loud, I have a company called Prepaid Legal on my side. I pay a few dollars, there's a few dollars every month to have them, and believe me, it balances the equation. I got a bill from Kaiser one day, and I told them, that ain't my bill. And they said, well, just pay it and we'll work it out later. I said, I ain't paying it. They said, well, then when I do this, that, and the other, I said, that's okay, I'll just let my lawyer. And they said, oh, wait, you know, you don't really have to pay it. So they back off, and but you got to have your own power. And the problem and the challenge here is, if this is the black family, and these are institutions and organizations who you don't know, then where does your money go? So you have a black family that goes out and makes money and brings that money in. And here's another component, we'll pause here and give you another problem. 99%, that one don't work, dude. You said that one work. That one don't work, so we have to do blue. 99%, oh, that one don't work either. What you say? I got the wrong set, huh? Okay, where's my set? I must have picked up the wrong set. I must have picked up the set you said don't work. Just those two. Okay, I got this. Dry erase. Okay, let's do this to see if it works. 99, there you go, 99%. So, it would be okay, it'd be wonderful, it'd be fantastic if we were all just 7 billion cells of one entity and we all work together. You know, liver ain't mad at the spleen ain't mad at the heart ain't mad at the lungs ain't mad at the leg ain't mad at the eyes. But unfortunately, folk mad on this planet, right? White folks mad at black folks, and we can explain that as another long conversation. And so they took advantage of us, and we are at a disadvantage. And so we divide up along lines. And for part of a study I really looked at while I was getting prepared for this was a thing called race, the power of an illusion. Because the concept that we use for race is completely irrelevant scientifically. Any two people on the planet, 85% of them the same. 85% the same, genetically speaking. You would not, if you were to just say, let's take a look at their genes. 85%, doesn't matter what color, how tall they are, gender, none of that matters for 85% of what's in your body, right? And the other 15%, again, is primarily superficial. It doesn't determine intelligence, doesn't determine how much you can love, doesn't determine how much money you can make, none of that. It's all this sociological construct we call race, which was done for a purpose of abusing black people, and it's still doing that today. So since these things divide up along race, we have to look at the impact of race on those things. And 99% of black people work for somebody who is not black. And 99%, I say this nicely, of the money we spend with somebody who's not black. So what does that mean? That if you as a black person, you got to go out and find a job with somebody who doesn't look like you, doesn't live in your community, doesn't support your community, but you're working for them. Then when they pay you, you got to go back and take that money and get back to them. Why is that significant? Here's a component of that you need to understand. So I used to work for a company called State Compensation Insurance Fund. I was a payroll auditor. What does that mean? I went to over 1,000 businesses while I was working for them, and I audited their payroll, see where the money goes, who gets paid what. And I found, and then there's a company called Center on Policy Initiative who actually did a very sophisticated statistical study on income in San Diego and came up to the same conclusion I knew, but I did empirical research because I was there every day. The average employee that we call EEs, employees, the little thing we made up, makes about $30,000 a year. And if I were to ask you what you think the average employer pays him or herself, you'd be surprised, because you would not guess that they pay themselves on an average $250,000 a year. By the time they get through with salary, draws, expenses, tax deductions, things that they acquire like the car they drive that's owned by the company, that's $30,000, $40,000 they saved out of their pocket, right? And then they get a tax deduction on driving it because they're putting the gas in it. All of that. So on the average, they pay themselves $250,000. How does that break down? Here's how this looks. Say you have a company that makes $1 million a year. Okay? Now, anybody who's been in business knows that about half that money got to go back into paying rent, paying for equipment, paying for insurance, and all that kind of stuff. So that's about $500,000 a year. About half of that. Depends on the company, of course, the type of business you're in. So the average business is spending half their payroll, half their money, their income on payroll, $500,000. So what happens if there's 10 people in this company, including the employer? That means on average, they're generating $50,000 in labor value. In labor value. Because what would happen to this employee? You say, well, employee, he works hard, he's got to take all these risks and all that. Say, okay, dude, I hear you, but I'm putting in 8 hours a day as an employee. How many hours are you putting in? Well, I'm putting in 16 hours a day. All right, double my salary. $60,000, I get that. But 10 times my salary? How do you justify that? Right, well, I'm taking all the risk and all that. I say, oh, here's the deal, dude. If the other 9 folks walked away from your business, how much would you make? That $1 million would drop down to $100,000. You could pay yourself $250,000. Let's say you could even make $200,000. You're still only going to get yourself $100,000 out of that if you get half of that. Likelihood is, if you're at that level where you're working by yourself, you're not making that kind of money. So then where does this $250,000 come from? Well, if everybody is generating on average $50,000 in labor value, that means this guy is taking $20,000 of your labor value to pay you $30,000. 20,000 times 9, $180,000. Plus his $30,000 to $50,000 that he gets himself. So his $250,000, his $250,000 is coming out of your labor value. He's taking your labor value. So you go to work every day, you work with this guy. 99% of us work for somebody who doesn't look like us, and when you're black, that means that they're getting two-fifths of your labor value. Which means you walk home with what? 3/5. That should sound familiar to you by now. Mm-hmm. Now, the funny part about this, and there's a little video by Naeem Akbar. It's only 8 minutes long, 8 minutes, 1 second, and it's called Imaginary Freedom. And in it, he talks about, the funny thing is, white folks think they're getting something, but white folks are the same trick bag. 99% of white folks work for somebody else. They just look for them. And what happens when that 99% look like them, here's what happens. As a black person, your black money goes into a white company and disappears into somebody else's community. So when they start buying real estate, and pushing up real estate values, it's not in your community. When they get college funds for their children, it's not for your children. When they do infrastructure development, that goes into their community, not your community. So what's happening is they're taking this $20,000, that's 2/5 of your labor value, out of your community. Not only are they taking it out of your community, they're keeping a watchful eye on you, because guess what happened? When you went to buy that transportation, that car, guess what they checked on? Your mortgage. They also checked, do you pay your cell phone bill? They also check, do you pay your internet bill? They also check to see where you shop. They also check to see where you buy your food. They also check to see, do you pay your water bill? All these organizations, all these institutions talk to each other about you. But if you were to go to your clothing store, Macy's, yeah, you shop at Macy's even though you can't afford it. Even if you go to Macy's and say, well, what can you tell me about Ralph's, where you get your food from? They wouldn't tell you nothing, but they talk to each other about you. So they're constantly in communication about you, and they are taking your money, and they're giving very little, if anything, back to you and your community. So, the other side of that equation is, when you go to buy that water, Okay, so if this is southeastern San Diego, now other cities have a little bit different. Let me explain to you something about San Diego and black folks. San Diego County is the 5th largest county population-wise in the country. United States of America got thousands of counties. San Diego is the 5th largest. The United States of America has tens of thousands of cities. San Diego City is the 8th largest city in the country. So we get people's attention. We got a $200 billion economy in San Diego County. But for black people, San Diego ranks 46th in population for black people. In other words, there's 45 cities that have more black people than San Diego has. Now, when you think about New York, DC, LA, Detroit, Chicago, Atlanta, right? You're like, oh yeah, it's big cities, and San Diego's bigger than some of those cities. We're the 5th largest county. Now, I just named like 7 cities, right? Which means we're bigger than some of them. But they got so many more black people, it makes a huge difference. They're the top levels of black people. LA got over a million black people. DC got over almost 1 million black people. Chicago has over 2.5 million black people. Last time I looked, Atlanta has almost over 2.5 million black people. The New York area got more black people than San Diego County got people. More than 3 million black people. San Diego County got 3 million people, right? So things don't work out quite the same around here. That's a very important equation when we talk about the Nehemiah Project and this challenge of black families and their money going out. Because first you go to work for somebody and they take 20% of your labor value, 40% of your labor value. Then when you go to spend the money, where in San Diego can you buy water from a black man? Where in San Diego is there a brick and mortar where you can buy food from a black woman? Not a restaurant, a grocery store. Where in San Diego is there a brick and mortar clothing store that you can buy new clothes from a black person? Where in San Diego is there a mortgage company, a black mortgage company that you can buy your house through? How about a black car dealership? Is there a black owned and operated car dealership in San Diego County? Right? Where is there a black owned and operated cell phone store? There is an African one on Imperial, on University, by the way. Where is there a black owned internet service provider? Steve, come on, you know his name, Steve Walters. And PCS WorldNet. And then recreation. Where's your black skating rink? Black bowling alley? Black theater? Now there's a couple of live theater. Yeah, but how about black movie theater? Right? So that means, that door locks. So black, so not only does 99% of you work for somebody who does not look like you, I said 99%, but it's really about 110%, because most of us are in debt. And the debt we owe to somebody who doesn't look like us as well. So actually, we're spending 110% of our income with folks who don't look like us. What does that mean? That means that we are essentially powerless in our community economically. So what are we going to do about that? That's the question. What is the proposition of the Nehemiah Project? The proposition of the Nehemiah Project is that we have to build institutions that can intervene on our behalf and reverse this equation so that there is synergy economically in our community. So that, actually I should leave those, because these arrows go both ways. Because what needs to happen is the family next door to yours in the black community needs to own the water store. The family next to yours or down the street needs to own the food store. The family across the street needs to own the clothing store, right? And because what happens? Then when we invest in real estate, we invest in our own communities. Infrastructure, we invest in our own communities. The college funds we build for our own children. The way to do this is, again, to build institutions that deal with the institutions you deal with. To create entities between the entities that you deal with. What does that mean? That means that if you have to deal with food, then maybe you should have a co-op that buys food in bulk that your families all contribute to, so that you can get a wholesale price on the food, you can make sure the food is healthy, you can get it where you want to, and the folks who are dealing with that situation look like you and keep it in your community. You also have a democratic process that controls this institution. Same thing for a mortgage company. Somebody needs to put together a hedge fund. So San Diego, County of San Diego, black folks, talking about money, we generate approximately $2 billion a year. So, what's not on here, I guess put it on here, the average median income in San Diego, last time I looked, was about $80,000 a year. That's a median. Median income for black folks is about $40,000 a year. Survival income, according to CPI, is about $66,000 a year. In other words, the average family, if it's not making $66,000 a year, they're in the hole. Average black family is making about $40,000 a year. Okay? However, there's about 150,000 black people, which breaks down to about 50,000 families, which generates about $2 billion a year. Not $2 billion and that's it, it's gone. $2 billion every year, we're going through $2 billion a year, and it always ends up back in these people's pockets. We go to them to get it out of their pockets. They take out of our pocket while they're putting in our pocket, and then we go back and we put it right back in their pockets. So they're keeping us in an enslaved situation. If we could get 1/10 of 1% of that money to control and use and grow, that would be $2 million a year. That could be a hedge fund that we could build, invest, grow, and draw from. $2 million a year is enough money to give a couple of loans out every year. Then that money starts coming back because people pay back the loans. And over a 10 to 20 year period, that $2 million, because 2 million plus 2 million over that over 20 years is $40 million. But when you add the leveraging capacity of $40 million, you're talking about $500 million. Now we could do some infrastructure work. We could make some college funds. If you do not like the way the school system's treating your children, you can build your own school with $500 million. We could employ your own people. You can make your own grocery store, your own water store. You could actually build a skate park for your kids, so they don't got to go out into danger zones to go skateboarding. So this is the equation we're trying to work on. So the Nehemiah Project proposes this, that we build these institutions in our own image. These would be black institutions that will interface with these other institutions, because let's face it, even though there's 50,000 of us, families, we only represent 5% of the population. It's going to be hard to control anything with that. We do not represent a plurality, let alone a majority of the people in any political jurisdictions. In other words, we can sway elections, but we can't control a single election. Latinos can control an election because they have enough people that if all of them vote as a block, they will put somebody in office. There's not a single political jurisdiction where that's true for black people. So we're going to have to deal with it, and at the moment, this is what it is. Right? The water company is the city of San Diego. The food people are Rouse and IGA and them folks. The clothing stores are Macy's and Target, and right? We don't control any of these institutions, but what we can do is build institutions built on our own image that can interface with these to the degree that we have control over our component of it. Now, what is an institution? Here's a critical component. In my estimation, you can see over here, right? We got this part? Okay. Institution is critical because institutions control America. That's why when you go to the grocery store, they have a bunch of lawyers. You see a grocery clerk, or maybe you got a machine now. Either way, you see a clerk, but you don't see who's controlling the institution, right? That's how institutions function. But you don't have a capacity to interface with an individual who you can actually do business with. You are at the mercy of whatever structures they have put in place. So your deal is put your own structures in place so you can deal with their structures. Because you can't do it as a person. If you really get mad at the clerk, or if you get really mad at Ralph, what are you going to do? You're going to call the CEO of Ralph? Dude, you need to make a change here. Right. Okay, so what is an institution? An institution has 5 components. 1, the institution must own the land on which it sits. And we don't have time. I'm not going to go into the whole land thing. But when we talk about air, water, food, clothing, and shelter, we're talking about land, right? Because air comes from plants. Plants are planted in the earth, in the land. Water, where does water come from? Well, you might think water comes from the sky. Well, when's the last time you got a cup of water out of rain? You can't go down to the ocean. We live in San Diego. You can't go down to the ocean and get a cup of water. The water that you drink is the water that is land that has come down to the land and been purified by the land through running through rocks and all that stuff. All of it. 91% of the water on the planet you can't drink, right? The 9% you can drink is the water that's on the land. Lakes, rivers, streams, wells, and springs of that level. So air, water, food, obviously, at least that comes from the land. Clothing comes from the land, right? Oh, well, I wear leather and I wear wool. Well, them animals The cows eat grass, sheep eat grass, grows in land, right? And the shelter. So the wood in your house, the bricks on your house, all that, everything comes from the land. We don't even go into the conversation discussion that you actually come from the land too, right? Every component of your body came out of this earth. So they must own the land. 2, if you have anything sitting on the land, you don't want the bank to own it. Why? Because of the thing called collateral. I'm not even sure how to spell it. Collateral, right? And if you have a building on the land that you haven't paid for, what do you think is the collateral? Right? So if you don't own the land and just talk to the bank, that means the bank can come and take it anytime. If you are one day late on a payment, you are now in default, and they can come take your land. Now, they don't ever do that because it doesn't help them that much, but they rarely do that, I should say. But if they want the land bad enough, they take it. In fact, you should look into what's called eminent domain. 2, you must own the building that's on the land. 3, you must own the enterprise that takes place in the land, in the building, enterprise. Why? Because a lot of people have determined that they're going to pay for a piece of property by leasing it out to somebody. And that's okay. That's not a problem in terms of pure economics. If it's just about pure economics, that's fine. But what happens if the tenant moves out? Right? Any of you who owns a piece of property, owns a house where you have somebody living in it, you know you got to have 3 to 6 months of that mortgage payment, that rent, whatever costs are in that place, you got to have that set aside, because if somebody moves out, it may take that long to repair it, refurbish it, and get somebody in it, and you got to cover those costs in the meantime, right? So what happens when somebody moves out? If you have the enterprise and you have, my kids ain't moving out because they ain't paying half rent in the first place, but that's another conversation. But you must own the enterprise that takes place in that building. 4th, in order for it to be an enterprise in our image, and we'll get into that in a minute, you must serve your own. Many of us go into business, and that's not a problem. If you go into business really for business purposes, that's what business is all about. So if you're looking at the black community and look at what our needs are, that our walls are broken down and our gates have been burned, if you're going to repair this situation, you cannot have a business that serves white people. How are you going to feed white kids and people, brown kids in your own neighborhood are not eating? Right? How are you going to do mortgage for white folks and other folks, and we can't afford to buy houses in our own community, right? If it's going to be an institution that's Afrocentric and in our own image, we must serve our own, right? And as a Baptist preacher, I could give you a whole lot of Bible on that, right? But the scripture I'll give you is that